All across New England, there are stories of lost caves. These local legends seem to invite exaggeration. Some inspire wonder. Others are hard to believe. It is within this mix of fact and fiction that most cave stories reside. And this is one such legend. A lost cave. A story of success and failure. Of search and discovery. And like all good tales, contains a mystery. This is the story of the Boys Halfway River Cave and the search for the King's Ballroom. Native Americans would have been the first to come upon the cave in prehistoric times. It would have made an ideal hunting shelter, being very near the Boys Halfway River. It also happens to be just 2 miles away from the Housatonic River, a major trade artery linking various tribes across the region. Although the presence of the cave was likely known since colonial times, it wasn't until about 1820 when it was first exploited. Locals began extracting marble, which was roasted in a kiln and sold as lime for fertilizer. Since there are few marble outcrops in the area, the cave would have been considered particularly valuable. However, this venture was abandoned when the lime turned out to be poor quality. Years passed, and the cave was seemingly forgotten. But who was the first person to fully explore its depths? It is not known for sure, but a local tradition has it that a hired hand named Sharp tied together 4 cart ropes, each 100 feet in length. He crawled deep into the cave and continued until all 400 feet of his makeshift guideline ran out. Just what he witnessed on his exploration that day has been lost to history. It wasn't until some years later that a local farmer named Henry Plum came upon the cave and explored it to a distance of about 60 feet. He kept his find secret, and in August of 1886 bought the land containing the cave. But Plum had a different plan for the cave. He was not interested in mining the marble, but rather in its potential as a tourist attraction. In the late 1800s, leisure and recreation were an important part of Victorian life. Summertime brought tourists from the sweltering, acrid streets of New York City to nearby Connecticut aboard steam locomotives. Any and all points of interest were exploited for entertainment value. It was these vacationers who Plum planned to attract with his marble cave. But first, he had some work to do. Immediately after purchasing the land, Plum hired workmen to dig out dirt and sand that had accumulated in the underground passageways. By October of 1886, they had unearthed a long tunnel leading to a room with high ceilings measuring 30 by 40 feet square. An underground space of this size would surpass the water-carved rooms of even the largest known caves in New England. As the legend goes, the room was named the King's Ballroom and was big enough to hold 75 people. Certainly an incredible discovery for southern Connecticut, an area with very few caves. According to a New York Times article dated October 17, 1886, the diggers discovered not just the large room, but several other tunnels. One such tunnel led back about 40 feet to a spring-fed underground stream. By February of 1887, Plum was convinced that the cave would prove to be the biggest wonder in New England. The Housatonic Valley Railroad now ran within a mile of the cave. Plum built a trail for omnibuses to carry tourists in from the railroad. He called his site Wildwood and developed the surrounding land into a park and dammed the river to create a wading pool. By April of 1887, the diggers were still clearing new passageways in his cave, and it seemed he was destined for success. But Plum was certainly not the first to capitalize on the idea of a tour cave. In the 1870s, the Salisbury Cave in northern Connecticut was one of only 3 commercial tour caves in America. Here, a mere 10 cents would buy entrance into the cave. Oilcloth suit and candle included. Like Plum's cave, a maze of water-carved tunnels led deep into a strange underground world. A world that few at that time had ever seen. Water eroded the soluble marble rock, leaving a network of low tunnels, connecting a series of rooms just tall enough to stand. The Salisbury Cave, later known as the Twin Lakes Cave, is to this day one of the largest known caves in New England. Because of this, one would assume the state of Connecticut is filled with solution caves. But this is not the case. There are hundreds of jumbled rock caves and cliff overhangs, but surprisingly, very few true solution caves. And even these rare few are limited to the northwestern hills of the state. This is what makes the story of this cave so unique. Not only was Plum's cave supposedly very large and very beautiful, but it was also in an area not known to have caves at all. The cave never did become the huge success Plum hoped it would be. By the 1890s, amusement parks became all the rage. Visitors stopped coming to Wildwood. Its popularity faded until Plum finally closed it down. The site reverted back to the forest, and the entrances became obscured. In the late 1960s, the cave was deemed to be too dangerous by the nuns that owned the property at the time. The Army Corps of Engineers stepped in to close the cave once and for all. Holes were drilled deep into the rock. Dynamite was inserted, and then detonated. The cave, that was once the shelter for Native Americans, worked hard by miners, and visited by curious vacationers, was now sealed to the outside world. Yet its legend still lingered. In 2017, I was invited to help rediscover this lost cave. A small but dedicated group was assembled by local historian Marvin Moss, including the new landowner. Early in the spring, Marvin and I reconnoitered the site. Since no obvious entrance could be found, I started to look for drill holes where the dynamite was inserted for blasting. It wasn't long before I found the telltale holes. We were determined as ever to enter and explore the cave. We knew we were very close. All we needed to do now was dig.
Pinpoint them to, you just delicately dig out where we think the entrance is on the farther side. I think that's bedrock right there too. What do you think is in the King's Ballroom? In the King's Ballroom. God. In it. I'm imagining you could probably still see the seats in there. If there were seats in there. I'm imagining the dirt flooding in from the entrance halfway through the ballroom, covering most of it. But there's still one corner where there's one seat barely visible still. And maybe a couple initials carved in the wall with some really early dates. And that's it. Just that's it. And you're not going to find anything else unless you dig through that slumped in dirt. That's what I'm imagining, X-ray vision right through this hill. And it's right about there. 200 feet in. Every time we dug a little bit, I knew we were going to be able to dig a little farther. We weren't done yet, we weren't exhausted yet, and then we would get another hint, and we dig, and then we didn't really find anything for a while, and then we'd find another hint, and then a void here and there.
So at this point, the backhoe kind of dug its way in, and there's a lot of rock that's gotten out of the way. A lot of trees and stuff have kind of obscured what's here, so he's mowing some of that down, getting that out of the way, so he's got plenty of room to move the backhoe back and forth. But we can already start to see that there's a sort of an archway. Didn't examine it close enough to know whether it's natural or man-made, but we're gonna quickly find out, I think, because we already got pretty far in. Moved some huge boulders out of here, and I think we're onto something.
By 1:30, an opening was finally revealed.
It's opening up down there.
What would we find inside? Would we make our way into the King's Ballroom? I prepared to enter the cave. a natural water-carved cave. That water was flowing through underground, so it probably came in over there. There's channels, you could see how the water carved channels to escape, because the water's going in and it's finding its way out. So the water's actually carving these channels to find a way out. I don't know where it comes out. I mean, it keeps going this way. So, I mean, that might be an... Although we had successfully reopened the cave, I found no obvious location of the king's ballroom. The legend was beginning to feel like a hoax, conceived to promote the cave to tourists. But we were not the first to explore the cave since the days of Henry Plum's Wildwood. Others had gone looking for the king's ballroom, long after the cave was abandoned, but before the entrance was blasted closed. I found the cave mentioned in a book called New England's Buried Treasure, written by the co-founder of the National Speleological Society, Clay Perry. By this time, the legend had grown. The King's Ballroom was now described as an underground auditorium, complete with stone seats and a table carved into the marble. When Perry visited the cave in the 1940s, he found only a small underground space, with no navigable tunnels. He noted in his book that a collapse must have sealed off the way to the ballroom. In 1960, the Yale Speleological Society set out to explore the cave. They surveyed and mapped it, but like Clay Perry, found no tunnels. They did record a legend that the King's Ballroom was entered from a passage at the bottom of the cave. A long tunnel led back to a 6 by 12-foot room decorated with stalactites, and then continued further back into the hill where it finally reached the King's Ballroom. They noted that the supposed entrance to this passage was now under a breakdown, a caving term for a collapse of loose rock. They marked the breakdown on their map, but made no effort to dig through it. We were now determined to succeed where others had failed, and find the King's Ballroom, or put the legend to rest as a hoax. I invited some expert cavers from the National Speleological Society to assist in the exploration.
Hey, I'm Steve Millett. I'm a caver from the Central Connecticut Grotto of the National Speleological Society. And I've heard about this cave over the years, never even been here to check it out, but it sounds pretty interesting.
Hi, I'm Mike Gerard. I'm a caver with the National Speleological Society and also with the New England Explorers. I've heard about this cave for quite a while, heard about it from the Yale publication, and been interested in going to see it, and excited to see what's going to be inside. If you look at the geological reports, this is like a contact point between a schist and metamorphic rock to the south, and sandwiched in between that, 50 feet below is where you get your marble, your limestone, and other various minerals. So the water's running over that less soluble rock and then finding this soft spot and working its way down.
Well, the passage keeps going back. Huh? Maybe the stories are true.
Point,
it's interesting because the marble, the bedding planes are at an angle, it's going to keep going down in that direction.
Here?
Now that there is airflow.
Here.
Because there's the fact there's marble on the right and the left means it was a tube with water flowing. Because if you look here, all the rocks are damp. But there was that one thing completely dry. And there was airflow. When I breathed, I saw this.
Oh, you did? I saw it because I looked
very
at my fog.
slow,
I didn't see.
But there is. The little bit of echo in my voice means there's at least a tube that keeps going. Not necessarily big space, but tube. Yeah, no, it's worthy. That little tunnel in the back is worth spending the day with a bunch of smaller, strong people pulling dirt and rocks out and seeing.
Looks like it keeps going. And a little hard work. I think maybe we might find a surprise on the other side.
2 weeks later, we returned with cave diggers.
Nice weather.
At 10 o'clock, we arrived at the cave and immediately began clearing the breakdown.
That's a big rock. The whole tree had.
We just want to lower the dirt enough.
We worked this way until about 3 o'clock, when the opening was made barely large enough for a person to squeeze through. When the loose rock was removed, a small water-carved tube, filled with dirt, was finally exposed. It continued in a northerly direction, the same direction that the bed of marble runs, according to our geological maps. After squeezing through with some difficulty, the tube opened up, but still not enough to stand upright. This tunnel was carved by flowing water, and this flowing water had to go somewhere, presumably deeper into the hillside, following the soluble marble.
Goes to a little room with a pool of water with a sump. It looks like the water goes underneath the rock. And then straight ahead, kind of the mud tube continues, but it needs to be dug.
The end of the tunnel was blocked up with dirt, a dead end for us today. Maybe beyond this dirt lies an open passage to the king's ballroom, or another 10 feet of passage and more dirt.
Definitely gives hope that this passage could still go on and lead to a king's chamber, or some kind of chamber at least. So even if the king's chamber doesn't exist, I think there's definitely potential for something lying past where we've gotten so far. But that's a lot of headway to make.
Or maybe the ballroom doesn't exist at all, and the story was purely hype to promote the cave. One thing is for sure, we had gone further than any past explorers had gone since the time of Henry Plum.
Just as it is now, I just barely fit. But you fit. I did fit, and I fit out, coming out.
Yeah, that's the important one.
It's easier to get in than to get out.
If the King's Ballroom does exist and is someday found, it would be one of the most fascinating speleological discoveries in Connecticut in the past 100 years.
I can hear my heart beating.
Until that day comes, the cave will continue to be a source of fascination and mystery. And maybe that alone will be its lasting legacy.